morning. My name is John Coburn. I work for Tyne and Wear Archives Museums, which is based in the northeast of England. And I'm based in Newcastle. And we are an organisation. We have 9 museums and galleries. We have 1 archives. We have 1.1 million object class count, and we have almost half of those online. And my role within the organisation is my title is digital coordinator, but the fundamental aim of my role is to explore the role and the public value of our collection online, and to try and innovate access to that collection online. So just as a kind of a refresher, I'm sure we're all familiar with these. The online collection, this is maybe an example of a particularly rich record with lots of information, good strong image, quite a few fields filled in. This is maybe the example of the record which quite a few of us are familiar with, of Portrait of a Man. This is from our collection. I didn't want to embarrass anyone else. So obviously there's a variation in terms of quality with the data and the records that we have online. With our own collection online, we just know from research that it just functions as a kind of a low-level educational resource for people who know what they're looking for. So that could be researcher, but it could also be school child. And the thing for me is that it's really audiences who are quite satisfied with the meaning that museums create for them. So objective historic context is sits very nicely with these people, as well as dates, chronologies, representative thumbnail images. That's the meaning, in effect, that we as museums impose. And this is something which, again, a few of us will be familiar with, but where we can begin to overstate the value of the online collection is that by virtue of being online, there is automatically a new audience who has an incentive to explore that what is actually just a huge database we can sometimes think is actually rich, navigable content. That an object record in isolation is a museum experience. And that when we think about innovation, sometimes actually what we're really just doing is using technologies that duplicate the object record experience, whether that be as apps as augmented reality or social media or so on. This is a good quote from Seb Chan, who, for those of you who haven't seen him speak or don't know him, he's now at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. And he says, digital really in the museum is not about endless collections web development, it's about new forms of curatorial practice. So actually, what is the value of digital in being able to curate and deliver new types of experiences that you couldn't previously? And for me, in my own work, the question that comes back to me is, well, how do we actually enable the development of the more compelling experiences online? I'm going to talk then about a project that we delivered last year and this year. It kind of overran, which was a research project that very much explored this question. It's called Half Memory, and I just remembered I haven't put a link to this online on my presentation, but you can find it within the Tyne and Wear Archives Museum's website. And Half Memory was a project that we delivered with a record label in Newcastle and also an music events company called Tusk Music, who specialise in kind of different, really challenging, innovative music and sound. And we work with the Pixar Palace Arts Programme, who are based in Newcastle at the Tyneside Cinema. And we, for the project, we invited a range of different types of creative practitioner to work with us and to identify strong and resonant collections areas that would connect with the way that they work. And we then support the development of that work, which we publish online. And the work, we hoped, was intended to inspire a new type of audience to see the value of the collections that we have. We really wanted to promote the collection that we have, which spans any number of disciplines, as a starting point, but also a point of connections for people who have ideas, creativity, and more importantly, people outside the museum who have the drive to create, who aren't afraid to actually apply a ruthless, new critical perspective on what is and isn't compelling. In effect, what they're doing is pulling apart the collection and its data and its metadata, and really just taking out the bits that connect with their own ideas, their own practice, their own concepts. So we really wanted to learn from how they produce work and how that connects back to our collection, but we also wanted them to develop ambitious work that would, at the end of it, have an audience. So our engagement aims for that audience were, it wasn't really about interpreting collections to teach history, but it was very much about creating a spark, about stirring the imagination and inspiring wonder. And what we hoped was that the produced work would compel a new exploration of collections from both audiences and people who are motivated to create. So at the end of this project, what we wanted was that it would shout about the fact that we are open to this type of collaboration, and we hope people would then come to us again with other new and interesting ideas for creative reuse. One of the guys that we work with is an amazing performer called Richard Dawson, and he's a musician, and he spent 2 weeks in the archives. He kind of practically lived there. Sometimes he'd wander down in the afternoon, he'd be asleep in there. But he just pored over material, and he ended up creating a piece of work, an album called The Glass Trunk, which in his own words was an album of songs concerned with the functions and consequences of violence, of family, memory and time, birth and death, body and soul. So it's the conceptualization of the work and how he's gone about producing the work is, to my mind, it's maybe quite different to how ordinarily in museums we would configure and design a piece of work. And this is one of the images from the scrapbook that he found. He found an incredible old scrapbook that was compiled by some mysterious contributor that featured beautiful cuttings from newspapers and diaries and letters, and all very rich, interesting material. We also work with some filmmakers and musicians called Warm Digits who are very interested in a particular type of visual image, and they were inspired by material which related to the construction of Metro, which is the region's rail network, and there's some incredible photography, documentary photography of the construction of the Metro and of the demolition of what was there before. They also used line drawings and architectural plans to create a film and an album called Interchange. And again, just to talk about how maybe the way that they conceptualized that work and how they created that work is sometimes different from the way that museums did it. They in their own mind, in their own words, said that they were using sound and music, rhythm and repetition to evoke and entrance and to encourage audiences and to think about the position of hope in civic life 40 years and a lifetime on from the origins of the photograph, which is very ambitious. And I would encourage you to find this material online because it really is great. So this is the type of image that they used. Again, it was sort of hundreds and hundreds of images which they used to create film. And this is the kind of image that we have, again, hundreds of thousands of. Basic FM is an internet radio stream that's produced by Pixel Palace, the partner who I've mentioned. It's a continuous 24-hour stream that broadcasts sound art, music, interviews, any number of interesting audio work. And what we wanted to do to promote the work that was being produced as part of Half Memory was to do a week of broadcast. So we put out an open call for sound and music that responded to a fairly broad Northeast theme. And all we asked of the work is that it sort of disrupted and maybe punctured a previous understanding of the past. And that might sound a little vague to you, but the idea was that we didn't want to incorporate sound and music that maybe played to an inherited or commonly understood version of Newcastle and its past, which is very industrial, and we have bridges, and it was to try and think in a different way. We call it 35-hour broadcast, rearranging and creating new meaning from the past. So it did actually include the bridge in some way, but it was an imagined soundtrack to the construction of the Tyne Bridge. There was really interesting montages of oral histories with electronic music, interesting field recordings, found sound. I think there's still an archive of that on Basic FM if you wanted to explore it, but it's really rich and diverse material. So I've mentioned that we saw the value in the project not just as an opportunity to create interesting work, but it was also to learn from how these people create work with our collections, and in turn what that tells us about our collections. So I've just created, this is an outline of some of the processes that they use to identify resonant collections areas. Richard was really hell-bent on finding the remarkable, beautiful berry story, something that has just never been told before, something that was deeply unusual. The example that I've got on this slide is of a piece of prose on the front page of a newspaper about a failed attempt to kill a horse. It's really odd, and it was on the front of the newspaper, and we don't know why. But if you find Richard's song "Poor Old Horse" is like you hear it everywhere. There's countless clips of it on YouTube. A very gruff man singing a very dissonant, quite horrific song around kind of a bungled attempt to kill a horse. All came from this one scrap. Warm Digits were really interested in aesthetics that sort of chimed with their collections that kind of chimed with their own aesthetic, congruous aesthetics, and they were really interested in post-war technological modernism and European urbanism. And when they first spoke to me, they said, "If you've got any collections around these areas," and it's like, I don't know, we don't ordinarily categorize collections with that kind of thematic approach. Illuminating the one compelling detail. So yeah, just picking out the one detail from a huge object record that was the only thing that resonated, and building a piece of work around that. Playing with the gaps, the poetic gaps in an object's narrative, so just using an image as maybe as a visual cue and as a jumping off point to create a piece of work that imagined something that kind of connects to that. And as I've mentioned, they wanted thematic visual search, so Richard wanted to find material that connected to mortality. Museums are not usually good at this kind of thematic approach, is my experience. So with all of this, it was about the voice of the museum being silenced, about objective historic interpretation being erased, and to concede that it was about animating concepts and ideas and stories, and that being the impact, not the objects. So, impact. Over 10,000 people accessed the produced work online via the stream at an event, and this was just over the course of 2 months. There was a very high depth of public engagement, very high dwell time and interaction with the material that was produced. There was 40,000 subsequent visits to the object records that existed online, people who just wanted to, who were compelled to explore the material that inspired the work. And it really was appealed to a wide range of audiences who weren't the traditional heritage audiences. So they connected in some way to the sound, the transport, to the local history element. A lesson for me was that if you provide the right access, the right collections access, people will then dedicate themselves and their lives to reusing it to produce a piece of work for themselves. This was not about commissioning some work for the museum, it was about developing their own creative practice. So in total, 491 hours were contributed, which if we look at a daily rate of £250, that's about £18,000 equivalent. We didn't pay anywhere near, most of these people didn't work for any money. It was a very modest budget. So following this, it's a chance for reflection and to think about, well, what is the museum actually? Are we there to experience and to create and design experiences, or are we there just to enable ideas? Since the project, we've had 11 new subsequent proposals submitted to me. Internally, we've been reflecting on what an ideas enabler would look like. And for me, it's how can we be a home for good ideas and a space to develop creative practice and seed innovative outputs. And I'll just talk very quickly about some of the proposals that have come to me. So somebody wanted to recreate aura from objects. This is quite a topical theme. Every time we talk about digital projects, usually someone sort of says, well, you've lost the original, so therefore you've lost the aura of the original, therefore your work is meaningless. Well, actually, a guy came to me and said, well, let's recreate aura. So we're looking at how we fund this. And his idea is we use drawing machines that use 3D visualization data to continually sketch the collection on a massive scale, and this sort of runs and runs and runs, and maybe drawings fall to the floor, and the idea is people take them with them. They're quite low fidelity drawings. It's not about kind of perfectly reproducing the collection. It's just about kind of creating new aura. Something maybe more traditional in terms of digital media, somebody wanted to produce a documentary film, which again, they're at kind of a late stage now at. project in securing funding to develop a documentary film about social activism of a family who lived in Gateshead, which is near Newcastle. A guy came to us who wanted to do an investigation into 3D printing, but an interesting investigation looking at the different stages of fidelity, so that when you produce an object as a 3D print, there are different stages of fidelity or quality that it goes through, and actually what is the impact on audiences if you produce a very low fidelity reproduction of an object. There's a discipline called flip-flopping. If you look online, that's worth investigating, where it's the practice of producing a physical work from a piece of, producing a digital work from a piece of physical work, and then producing that back again as a physical work. Have a look. And lastly, a piece of theatre actually happened independently of our organisation. I didn't even know this had been developed, but someone sort of heard about Half Memory, just took it upon themselves to visit the archives and produced a play which is now touring independently of our organisation. They didn't really need to kind of consult us, and that, for me, that was really important. They just developed it themselves. So, closing slide. All of this, the measure of success, to my mind, isn't really about the quality and the perceived quality of what these people are producing, but actually it's about audiences understanding that they have the license and the permission to create with collections. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that creative space and freedom has really high value and doesn't often exist inside the museum, but really exists outside the museum if you can make the right connections. Like I say, my role is sort of digital, but this project the emphasis was on experimentation, meaningful experimentation, not technology. So quite a few of the works that are going to be proposed and developed are digital, I guess, but that's not the interesting component of that project. So they could be digital, they could be physical. This is not a commissioning process. Clearly it's not new to museums to commission this kind of work, but what is different for us is that we want people to come to us with ideas. There's no declared funding, so when I talk about the fact that museums are a space to develop ideas, we're also a support network to help them find funding to produce that work. So currently there's 3 applications which we're trying to find funding to develop further with the artist. And the last point is something I fully believe, which is within the kernel of each proposal is our collection, and I do believe that what is created gives this collection new meaning. Thank you very much.